Welcome back to the Climate Playbook series. This is Barney Wong with One Tiny Drop. Now that we're finished with the veils as an individual habit, powered by individual habit, we're going to move from this area of this map into the ontological security side of it. And again, just as a reminder, why we're here, why we're going through this journey, the context is that our desire from episode 1 is to be an actor in a sustainable planet. However, where we're finding ourselves as victim and spectators to an ailing planet, and there's a 50-year-old gap. And we're trying to solve that 50-year-old gap through this video series. So in Ontological Security, which is this set of videos, we'll be using that as a way to segue from our habits and to look at our deeper motivations with ontological security as the first place. It is this barrier or this buffer right here that protects the self. And again, we'll be talking about the self in the next set of videos. But for this set of videos, we'll be looking at ontological security, how we require calories and energy, and some self-esteem enhancements to create this buffer zone of ontological security. And also, I just want to bring up that the shift that I'm looking for with ontological security is in the setup, the construction of self, how in the old way, where ontological security, we have a firm sense of self, but to show that that firm sense of self locks in some of these narratives and processes or partial sides of the processes that causes us problems. And it will lock us out and limit us from solving the harm problem that we have here. And the shift is from that firm sense of self to thriving within ambivalence. Also, part of that is to look at, associatively, safety by having a world in a constant way or in a fixed way into a safety where we are in harmony to the fluxing of processes that really lead to this planetary balance. So we're unable to have planetary balance because we ourselves don't have a free path towards this harmonious balancing within us. And then we'll use towards the end of this set of series with ontological security is to touch on modal confusion, and that's the work of Erich Fromm, where we engage with the world in this having, this possession, this category of reducing things to abstraction, to a sense of being where we can be happy rather than having things as a way to compensate for it. And also to use ontological security as a way to see that the old way, that the problem in the external really points to the problem or the source emanating from the internal. So with that, let's proceed with ontological security. I just want to give an overview of where we were at in episode 7, so that in this way we can segue into this ontological security. In that 5-part series where we dealt with the functional aspects of habit, chasing calories and energy, we looked at veils that is powered by habits in a way that how it connects to this analogous model where habits allow the spread of the here and now so that we can pursue the larger appetitive goal, as well as a squeeze that reduces our aspirational consideration for that larger appetitive goal. And the habit as well is connected to this pinch point, this lever that activates in preventing arousing our aspirational state. And the size of our aspirational state is our salience, the ability for it to make it onto our cognitive map or our salience mapping. So we establish that relationship between habits to the switch, habits to the spread, habits to the squeeze, and in terms of the immunity by moving the pin. And then we looked at the top 5 reasons why people are citing they're not working on the climate or climate inaction. And looking at it from that perspective of the veils, we came to an interpretation where there was a loss ecology of friction or dissonance in the case of veils. There was a loss of cognitive grammar. We were in an impoverished environment of the rat cage versus the rat park, and that we have resorted to avoidance as a resilient strategy to maintain our equanimity. But also our equanimity is where it's one that is not growing. It's pretty much petrified in a existing form. So we looked at the rat cage and the rat park, and it produced our first set of solutions from an ill-defined place to a well-defined place that brought us changes from the components or the feature list of the rat cage. We looked at the feature list of the rat park, and we tried to tie it into the in an analogous way, how we can make the change for ourselves in the way that we approach problems, and not put the entire burden on the individual to curb their appetite. And moving on from that, and this segues into our current episode 8, we talk a lot about the work of Tim Myers, or we alluded to Tim Myers' work, where we are trying to maintain our not lost ways of defending our psychological equanimity, as well as ensuring that we do not feel the need to defend our psychological equanimity. So that takes us to ontological security, where we'll look at the components of predictability, autonomy, and self-care. So I want to bring in our trusty video screen and talk about ontological security and how it relates to habits. So I just gave you the overview of our last episode and the mechanical analogy of the perfect process under the imperfect conditions. And I want to address, moving on, that what we had covered in episode 7 and 3 to 7 is dealing with just the outer skin, which is the functional aspect. If you imagine our outer skin, that is a physical skin, where we're dealing with calories and energy, but also it's motivated by fear. What we're going to get into is the underskin, which is the skin beneath the physical skin. And it's a symbolic skin. And it deals with meaning creation so as to make it salient for ourselves so that we can hold it in mind. It's in our foreground process. And it has a context that allows us and affords us to expend the energy because it's important to us. However, instead of fear-driven, it's anxiety-driven. And I want to get into the work of Jennifer Kent, where in 2015, her work deals with automobility, and it's a use of cars in Sydney, Australia. And they looked at participants who were using their cars beyond saving time and beyond increasing reliability. So the person, let's say, had a bus ride that was 30 minutes, but their car ride was 40 minutes. And they were investigating what was their symbolic motivations that allowed them to make that choice that was neither time savings or reliability savings, or increased reliability. So they looked at a sample of 15 people, and they had 2 rounds of interview. And the barriers beyond time in their car choice use is that the desire for security in the modern life, which is reinforced through routine practice. So there is a desire for this security which is embedded through our routines. And one of the next one is the modern individual is working harder to ground and routinize his or her life story. So again, this is a symbolic need beneath, in our underskin, beneath our physical skin, of just energy and calories. So I want to look at this chart right here and look at the featureless distinction so as to drive the difference between physical security and ontological security. Physical security does with the security of the body. It's a survival. It's motivated for survival. And it's a freedom from danger and threat posed by external entity. And it's fear motivated. So in our habits, on our functional level, it's represented, for me, it's an outer skin where we're chasing after calories and energy. What we are covering today in this episode is ontological security, and is the security of the self maintained through a sense of stability. Stability of self through the stability of relationships with the other, stability through the relationships with our surroundings. It's the maintenance of self-narratives, and it's a distinction between self and other, differentiation, and routines. And it's driven by anxiety instead of fear. So I call that a habits as a symbolic to serve this ontological secured self, and it's an underskin. So we'll be going from the outer skin, from episode 3 to 7, into the underskin, which is this episode. So the definition of ontological security, to help us ground the use of that term and what concepts and relatability that we can have with it, is a sense of order and continuity in regard to an individual's experience. And there's a taken for grantedness. This way we don't have to revisit something that we've taken for granted. It helps us background our experience, and we can take it for granted that it's going to be there when we need to recall it. And it's made less salient. Again, it's driven into our background. Therefore, we need to spend less cognitive energy, but we ensure that it's there when we want it. It's also the ability to give meaning to our lives. And this meaning is found in experiencing both positive, stable emotions, and also avoiding chaos and anxiety. And this last one about avoiding chaos and anxiety goes back to what we had previously covered in equanimity, which is the resilience to everyday or normal disturbances. So it affords us a positive view of the self, the world, and the future. So Jennifer's work has this map right here where the use of the car affords us these components to our daily lives: autonomy, predictability, and acceptance. And it feeds into our coherent life story, or it ensures or maintains our coherent life story. And again, this is symbolic. And these are things that matter to us: family, moving up in society. And we'll cover that as we look into these components. And that leads us to feeling ontologically secure. So you might ask, why are we interested in this symbolic need, or this symbolic maintenance of self? Remember Natasha Dow-Schüll. She was the author of Addiction by Design. This is her quote: "You may not be engineering this," and she was talking about the casino and the addictions and the habits. "But if we reverse engineer it for you a little bit, maybe you would not want to go that way. So in some ways, I want to get into this as a way to tease out what are the hidden motivations in our habits that is beyond the functional. There's a symbolic aspect to it, and it's often tied into anxiety versus fear. So again, this chart right here that Jennifer put up, to me is it illuminates how we increase time on the device, whereas this quote by Natasha is how can we increase choice that often is locked out by increasing time on device. We have this paradox right here. We want to be adaptive to threats, so we want to increase our choice. But in becoming ontologically secured, we are increasing our time on device that locks us out from this choice. So we have this clash. So we're here to resolve that clash and look from a deeper way by defining the problem differently, and hopefully we can break that clash and find more choices in spite of being ontologically secure. And that's what this episode is. So let's look at Jennifer's work. On the high level, ontological security, let me just go back. I basically took this and just added these three, this 1, 2, 3, 4 components, and just bypass this for the time being. Let's just look at the functional components that we live our lives, and how we live our lives that leads us to ontological security. So the three components is predictability, autonomy, and acceptance. And I'll break it down for you what they are. First one is predictability. So let's look at what makes up predictability. The definition of predictability is it gives us a sense of confidence in the continuity of our social and material environment. Besides the fact that it empowers us, it also promotes the idea of living a life that has a future, or we can focus on the future, and allows for forward planning. And what that does is that when we can project into the future, it signals that our actions and behavior involved in living have meaning. So let's see how the car use can support predictability in a number of ways. So the first one is routine. So many of the participants spoke that there are many different routines that make up their day-to-day lives, with the car as the place for them to perform those routines. So the things like parking the car, having to make a route choice, deciding on how to get to work or how to get to so-and-so's place, making phone calls in the car, the application of makeup, listening to your favorite radio station programs. Well, these are all things that were routinely done in the car, and they were accomplished in this private space and private time that's granted by commuting, for instance. So what it does is that it allows us to play out routine that is important to us, that feeds us a sense of predictability. When we choose cars as a place to play out our routine, it does narrow our transportation choices. We can't take a bus. We can't be singing out loud unless you're a sociopath. You enjoy singing out loud and everybody's staring at you. But in the car, we can sing out loud and not feel that embarrassment of being looked at. So when our choices is narrowed down by this habit, and since driving a car to work is a routine in itself, the car becomes a preeminent choice in our transportation, but more importantly, how we can symbolically feed our needs. So going back, we can see the picture of the guy with the car and how he has routines in his everyday life. And we can see that we develop from routine a constancy for identity and agency to flourish. But more importantly, or just as importantly, we inoculate from our existential anxiety of the unknown. And this is part of the preserving our psychological equanimity by warding off the anxiety of the unknown, or being resilient to unknown by avoidance strategy. And also it allows us to get on with our life. So for routine, the takeaway point is it preserves our everyday practices, interactions, and our individual orientation towards social organizations. So on the participants, there were two participants, for example, that describe how the practice of driving to work has been demoted in the realm of the subconscious, where they don't think about it. So Diane, this is her quote, "It's like, I think it's just the ritual of it, driving to work. It's just what I do. You know, you get in the car, you go to work, yeah, that's it." So that's Diane here, Diane. And then there's another participant named Frederick, and his quote is, "For me, driving to work is just something I do. I don't think about it, and it doesn't bother me at all. I like it. I don't want to have to think about it every day, you know." So those are the direct quotes of the participants with predictability. The next one we have is called decouple. And it's a way of decoupling our home environment from our work environment so that we afford the flexibility to make choices. From here, being able to drive, aside from our routine that provides us a space and time from enacting predictable routines, there are other ways the car adds to predictability. So driving a car makes it possible to maintain a predictable home and work environment. And here we can see that being able to drive to work expands our ability to change our employment location without moving the house. So we decouple the work from the home. Or we can move to a different home without having to change our employment, which is the other side of decoupling. So there was a participant named Leroy where he was laid off from his job that was only a 15-minute bus ride from where he lived with his wife and his 2 young child. And he was offered a job where he was given a choice of a lower paid position in the city, so his commute was pretty much the same, or a higher paid position requiring a much longer commute. In this case, it was 75 minutes car commute each way. He took the longer commute because the pay raise allowed him to maintain a stable home life by not having to move his family. He openly admits that this decision to accept the car-dependent job enabled him to also have a second child, because he could then allow his wife to take time off from work to raise the second child. So this is Leroy's words. I mean, the perfect job for me would have been to stay closer to town at the end of the day, but obviously I would have had to take a pay cut. I wasn't prepared to do that. So, as you can see, this car use makes it possible the stability of a predictable work and home environment, a predictability that leads to ontological security. So the takeaway for this slide is it provides resilience to changes in home and work environment. So let's take a look at the last the component of predictability, which is normality. And in normality, we can see that the participants wanted to live a life that have an upward movement. So in this case, they were looking for a better home as they participated in the workforce. They want to live in a better neighborhood where there was probably less crime, bigger lawns, and they want to move up in life that's harmonious to their family and societal expectations of what moving up in life looks like, or being successful in life looks like. So they have this, the participants express a collective interpretation of this called normality, where one of them explained she bought a 4-bedroom house. It was over 65 minutes commute from her work. But to her, and her name is Megan, it seems to be what you do, and what you do in terms of upward mobility. And these are her exact words right here. We are just moving up to the next phase of life, I guess. We had our little 3-bedroom house, and we renovated it and did it up. And that seems to be what you do when you first buy a house. Then you sort of move up and move on. So what Megan is pointing at is, at the very practical level, the car supports cultural constructions and interpretations of normalcy, which is in this case moving up. It afforded her to buy a larger house in a more affordable area than the area that she worked at. So this moving up is seen as, you're moving up to the next phase of life. And this shows us that driving has complex connections to living life the way it should be lived. Not only it includes day-to-day routines, as we covered previously, but it extends into acting on our interpretations of living a life harmonious with family and societal expectations. So as you can see, private cars secures a quintessential normal path through life. So the takeaway for this slide, it supports cultural constructions and interpretations of normalcy. So in summary, for these 3 components of routine, decoupling, and normality, predictability is important to the pursuit of being ontologically secure. The car supports the routine and predictability on many levels. And when we demote the need to be mobile to the background of the unconscious, it allows the participants to concentrate on tasks that was perceived to be more important or relevant. It also provides a physical space for routines to be constructed and protect other routines structured around the place of residence and place of work. So many of these routines are strongly connected to culturally ingrained ways of living in modern life, in which the practices and just entrenches or drives in the need for the use of car in order to have a stable home and stable work, and also to allow moving up in society. So it becomes, these goals are well-known pathways for attainment in having a sense of being secure. So there's a sense of mastery that comes from knowing